Hey there everyone, Ramesh here, back again with another video. In this video we are going to see Spring Boot application internals. So basically we are going to look into Spring Boot application execution process. Well, whenever we create a Spring Boot application using Spring Initializer, then by default Spring Initializer will add a class, right? That is called Spring Boot entry point class or application class, and it contains a main method, and internally main methods make a call to run method. Okay, so when we run our Spring Boot application, there is a lot of things will happen behind the scene, and in this video we are going to explore what are the things will happen once we run our Spring Boot application. So there is a lot of magic happen, right? We no need to do anything, we just simply run our Spring Boot application, and Spring Boot application will do a lot of things for us. Okay, it will create IOC container, it will register a lot of listeners, trigger the runners, and it will create the environment, it print the banner, it will does a lot of things. So in this video I will create quickly a Spring Boot application, and I will show you step by step, and I will also debug the Spring Boot application, and we'll deep dive into the source code, and we'll see how the run method is implemented, and how the run method will do all these steps. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and let's quickly create a Spring Boot project. Go to file, new, and then Spring Starter project, and look at here, I'm going to give project name as Spring Boot internal, something like that, and type Maven, and packaging as a jar. Java version 11, I'm going to choose Java 16. Okay, Java 16, which is the latest release. You can choose Java 11, 8 as per the Java installation on your machine, and language Java. And let's give group ID as com.springboot, and artifact ID is nothing but our project name, so let's keep as it is. Let's keep version as it is, description, demo project for Spring Boot, and package, let me quickly change com.springboot.internals, something like that. So once you are happy with the details, then go ahead and click on next, and keep this Spring Boot version as it is. So this is a stable and latest release of Spring Boot, and which is recommended by Spring team. Don't choose snapshot here because they are not stable. So let's keep Spring Boot version 2.5.0, and then go ahead and choose one dependency, that is Spring Web Starter dependency. So we use Spring Web Starter dependency to create Spring Web MVC application as well as RESTful MVC application, and it internally provides Apache Tomcat as a default embedded container. Okay, go ahead and hit finish. Our Spring Boot application is successfully created, and we have used Maven. So Maven will take a couple of seconds to download all the dependency from the internet, and it will store on its local repository. Perfect, our Spring Boot application is successfully created. Now let's go to the main entry point class of this Spring Boot project. So look at here, this class is called start class or Spring Boot main entry point class. Okay, and this class annotated with @Spring Boot application annotation, and this annotation is basically a combination of these three annotations: @Spring Boot configuration annotation, @enable auto configuration annotation, and @component scan annotation. So this @Spring Boot configuration annotation internally uses @configuration annotation. Okay, the use of @configuration annotation is to create Java based configuration. Okay, and @enable auto configuration, basically we use to enable the auto configuration, and @component scan annotation will scan the packages, the base package plus its sub packages. Okay, now what we'll do, we'll deep dive into the internal source code of run method, and then we'll understand how Spring Boot internally bootstrap our Spring Boot application. Well, the execution of this Spring Boot application starts from main method here. So in normal Java programs, we use a main method to run our Java programs, right? And the execution of the program starts from the main method. Alright, and similarly in Spring Boot application, this class has a main method, and the execution of this application starts from the main method, and main method are internally called a run method. Okay, so run is basically a static method, and look at here, Spring application is a class. It has a run static method, and here we are using class name to call a static method. So we usually call static method using class name, right? We don't create object to call the static method. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go inside a run method here. Okay, and if you can see here, run is a static method. Okay, and this run method will call internally another run method. So there are overloaded static run methods, and this run method internally create object of Spring application, and then it internally again call the run method. Okay, let me put the breakpoint here. We are going to debug, so I will keep a breakpoint and then go inside a run method. Okay, all right, so this is a very important, guys. This run method contains all the logic. This logic will execute whenever we run our Spring Boot application. Let us try to understand step by step what Spring Boot does behind the scene. Okay, the first step is a run method will start a stopwatch. Okay, the stopwatch class object is created and it is started here to just identify the time taken by our Spring Boot application. And then what it will do, it will declare configurable application context object as a null. Okay, it will just declare here, and it will create an object of this configurable application context later. Okay, so just above try block it will declare as a null. Okay, and then it will get the listeners, and look at here the command line arguments. Whatever the command line argument we pass to the main method internally pass to the run method, and then these command line arguments will be passed to get run listeners method. Okay, so these are the application level listeners. So this method will get all the listeners, and next it will start the listeners. Okay, after that it will prepare the environment. So environment can be a production environment or a test environment or QA UAT environment, etc. Okay, so based on the environment we configure in application.properties file. So based on that Spring Boot will configure the environment. Okay, by default it will provide a default, and it will prepare the default environment. Okay, after that it will print the banner. Okay, so banner in the sense whenever we run our application, for example, let me run quickly. So look at here, our Spring Boot application is started and this is called a banner. All right, so once a run method prepare the environment. Okay, once it will prepare the environment, then it will print the banner, this banner. Okay, and this banner can be customizable, and we can turn off this banner. For example, that code is written inside this method. Okay, turn off, and we can customize this banner as well. Okay, great. So after that it will create application context object. So this is a really important. Okay, so run method internally create application context object. So let's dive into this method, and you can see here create. So let's jump into this create method. Okay, and then it will go here in a default, and it will create the application context object based on the web application type. All right, so in our case we have added Spring Boot starter web dependency in a pom.xml. For example, let me open pom.xml. So look at here, we have added Spring Boot starter web dependency. Okay, so based on the dependency it will it will decide the web application type. Now in this case it will decide the web application type as a servlet, because we are going to create a Spring Web MVC application or Spring REST API application, and which is which is in a servlet category. So in this case it will create an instance of this class, okay, and this class returns application context object. So let me add a breakpoint here. So if you want to create a reactive application, then you need to add Springboard starter web flux dependency, then it will create an instance of this class. If you don't add Springboard starter web dependency or web flux dependency, then it will choose a web application type as none, and it will create an object of this class. Okay, so basically there are three categories: servlet, reactive, and default. So if your application belongs to servlet, then this application context object will be created. If your application comes under reactive, then this object will be created, this class object will be created. If your application is not belong to servlet and reactive, then this class object will be created. Okay, now you understood how it Springboard internally creates the object of application context. So these are the classes which internally implements application context interface. Okay, so these are the implementation classes of application context interface. Okay, now let's go back to run method. So once run method creates application context object, then it will refresh the context, and then it will stop the stopwatch, and then it will trigger the runners. So one more very important point is, if we don't use Springboard, then we need to manually start the application context, right? And Springboard internally start the application context for us. We don't need to manually start the application context, or we don't need to manually create the Spring IOC container. So in this case, application context is nothing but Spring IOC container. Alright, once stopwatch stopped, then it will internally call the runners. So let me dive into call runners method. So look at here, this runner method will basically internally trigger all the runners. In Springboard application there are two types of runner. One is application runner and another is command line runner. So we frequently use these two runners, right? So basically we use these runners to run our logic only once during our application startup. And I hope you probably use command line runner, right? So you can use a command line runner to run your logic only once during application startup. So whatever the command line runner we use in our Springboard application, that will be triggered over here, okay, inside call runners method. After that it will return the context, application context object, that is nothing but Spring IOC container. It's pretty simple steps, right? Okay, let's quickly put the breakpoint and let's debug and let's clarify whatever the understanding we had, it is correct or not. So let me run our Springboard application in a debug mode. Switch to debug mode and look at here the run method. So main method internally make a call to run method, right? Now we are in a run method. Okay, let's go ahead and let's click on a step over here and we'll move to the next step. Perfect. Now we came inside a run method and look at here, the stopwatch started. Okay, next move here, and here get run listeners method will get called, and the listeners will started here, and after that it will prepare the environment, and then it will print the banner. Okay, and we come to create application context, and now the control moves inside create application context. Okay, and web application type is servlet. Okay, and now the web application type is servlet, hence it will create object of this class. Okay, so by creating the object of this class, the application context object will be created. Okay, and then it will return back to create application context method. Okay, after that it will refresh the context, and then it will trigger the runners, and then finally it will return the context. And if you can see, the context is annotation config servlet web server application context. Okay, so this is the application context object, and this is nothing but our Spring IOC container, and it contains all the beans that we configure in our Spring Boot application. I hope you understood how Spring Boot internally create application context object. So it will create based on web application type. Now in our case, web application type is servlet. So this is a very important, try to understand the Spring Boot internals. I mean how Spring Boot will work behind the scene, and how Spring Boot will create all the stuff that is required to run Spring Boot application. Now let's go to diagram here, and let me summarize the steps. So we have a Spring Boot main entry point class. It contains a main method, and main method internally called a run method. A run method internally start the stopwatch to identify the time taken by Spring Boot application, and then it will prepare the environment. Environment can be a production or test environment or a development environment as per the environment we configure in application.properties file. And then it will print the banner, and it will start the IOC container, and then it will refresh the application context, and it will trigger the runner, and finally it return application context object to the main method. Alright, so these are the steps involved in Spring Boot application execution process. So if you want to understand more, then you can debug and you can understand in depth. Alright, so these are the high level steps. You can just remember how Spring Boot behind the scene does all the steps for us. That is the beauty of Spring Boot. Spring Boot provides a lot of auto configuration stuff for us. We don't need to manually configure the same configuration again and again. Alright, I hope you at least get an idea how run method works, and how it internally does all the things to kickstart Spring Boot application. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope this video will helpful to you. Okay, if you find this video useful, then subscribe to this channel, and yeah, let me know if you have any question in the comment section. Thanks for watching guys.